We're excited to have you join us today. We'll get started in just a minute as folks continue to log in. As a quick reminder, we like to keep these webinars conversational, so feel free to engage with the chat throughout the session, and we'll address questions as they come up throughout the webinar. But with that, let's dive in. I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. Ashley, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can. Hi, I'm Ashley McAlpin. I'm our head of marketing here at Rockerbox. Though neither, I guess I'll preface this entire conversation with Kelsey and I are not lawyers. This is not legal advice. We are by no means, supreme experts in tariffs, but what we have done is listen to a number of customer calls and talk to a number of brands at scale about what the new tariff landscape means for them and how Rockerbox can kind of help support them during uncertain economic times. And so we're going to focus a lot on that in the conversation today. But I did want to give that caveat that if you ask us a specific question, we're probably going to punt it somewhere else. Kelsey, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Kelsey. I'm the head of customer success at Rockerbox. And yeah, to Ashley's point, have been speaking to a lot of customers around the position that they're in and how they're navigating these challenging and unpredictable times. So excited to get into it today.
All right, thank you both. Our first question is, how are these new tariffs impacting the way your customers are thinking about marketing strategy today? Ashley, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so I think, the tariff conversation is evolving, but they are forcing this kind of strategic pivot from a growth at all costs to a resource protection and validation kind of perspective. And we've been seeing that shift even before the tariff conversation kind of got started. But I think we're seeing it even more. And so there's some interesting research as I was kind of preparing for this webinar and kind of listening to customer calls. The IAB just reported earlier this month that 94% of advertisers are concerned about tariff impacts. I mean, that's a given, right? I think everybody, advertisers, consumers, everyone is kind of wondering, what are these tariffs going to mean for us? But 60% of those advertisers are anticipating cutting ad budgets by 6 to 10% this year. So it's a huge volume, especially when you're talking about brands at scale. That's a lot of money that these brands are considering cutting based on these tariffs. And we're hearing directly from customers that tariffs are really causing this reactive distraction from their long-term planning. So customers who were really proactive and they felt okay, we're in a really great place. We're gonna beat our goals. I was listening to one call and the brand was saying we were on track to outpace ourselves from a goal perspective, and now these tariffs have put us into this reactive space where we're going to be lucky to even come close to the goals that we set. And I think we're seeing that across a lot of brands. And I think that one executive, he said, quote, I'd rather be focused on growing the business than constantly asking, what do we do now? And I think that's a sentiment that every brand shares. And again, we're seeing brands sharing that they're cutting media spend due to this macroeconomic pressure. And basically Rockerbox is helping these teams replace those reactive decisions with real-time insights. And so we're supporting them from they don't have to just wonder what was working and what should I do. We're offering them confidence during kind of this unpredictable budget shift situation. But Kelsey, I'd love your take too.
Yeah, I think right now the biggest thing is just uncertainty. So things are changing, not even just by the day, sometimes by the hour. And the position that brands are in is they're needing to protect their margins as they think about changes in prices, but then also still looking to hit the goals that they previously set, or they're needing to reforecast. So they have some tough decisions to make. Do we increase prices and potentially impact new customer acquisition, or do we delay purchasers, or do we take a hit and think about cutting OpEx costs, and where other places can we drive efficiency? That could be reducing budgets by channel or overall. I think there's a lot of considerations at play right now and a lot of uncertainty. And who knows even what's going to happen in the next couple days or even week.
Mm-hmm. All right. Our next question is, what tools or features within Rockerbox can help brands track and respond to these shifts in buyer behavior? Kelsey, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think the first thing to dig into a bit more here is what are we expecting in terms of shifts to buyer behavior? And I think this is where the uncertainty piece and also just fluctuating environment comes into play. So right now we have user behavior that both reflects kind of what we expect to happen pre-tariff and post-tariff at the same time. So really pre-tariff, we might, and we're seeing this across, some customers or even customers are leaning into this messaging of expedited buying behavior. So that means, if there's anticipated increase in prices, likely your buyers might decide, hey, I've been considering buying that new pair of shoes, but I just got myself a new pair of running shoes last week, right? I'm going to buy those shoes now before they potentially increase in price. So what you might see is your time to convert is actually temporarily shortened. Now, at the same time, we're starting to have buyers concerned around price sensitivity. And when they see those prices actually increase, if they do, then you're going to see delayed buying behavior. And that's going to have a few different impacts, right? Overall consideration time is going to increase. This means that people are going to be doing more research, and that can impact your performance across channels, right? You might start to see an increase in efficiency in some of your non-brand search campaigns, where you're seeing your consumer sit longer in that consideration period and really research that decision to say, okay, what is the best pair of running shoes for me to purchase at this given point in time? What this also, you should be thinking about is the impact this has on top of funnel performance. So where you may have previously seen someone who enters the funnel through Facebook awareness converts in, 7 days, maybe that's now being lengthened to 14 days, even longer. And depending on the look back window you're using, depending on which metrics you're leveraging to determine success, you could actually start to undervalue some of those top of funnel channels. So something that we've been working with customers on is, instead of just looking at ROAS or just looking at your CPA against new purchasers, should you also start to look at site visits? Should you also start to look at PDP views? Where are the early indicators of success for these top of funnel channels? You can measure this in Rockerbox, but you can also, for those of you who aren't leveraging Rockerbox, whether you have GA, looking at platform, determining how else can we identify the success of these top of funnel channels with a longer consideration window. I'm curious if anyone has any questions here, or Ashley, if you have any thoughts too.
Yeah, no, I was going to echo a lot of what you said. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I went ahead and posted in the chat so you guys can see where that is. But yeah, I think it's interesting, Kelsey, because there's two sides of it, right? Like you were talking about, like in the short term, like we might see like these like much quicker customer journeys where customers are all kind of like scrambling to buy the things that they were going to buy because they don't know how this is going to impact them. But then on the other hand, we're also like simultaneously seeing this like purchase journey lengthening happening. It was really interesting. The IAB report that I was reading it said that 70% of the consumers were adapting their behavior due to the economic uncertainty, which meant like to them, that meant like delaying purchases, switching brands, or increasing their research, which I think is really interesting too, right? Like we're seeing more maybe competition with brands that didn't see as much competition in the past because consumers are doing a little bit more research. We've seen this play out in data with clients using Rockerbox to monitor time to convert and adjust their attribution windows and things like that. One of the retail customers, so I was listening to a call of theirs recently where they were discussing kind of their point of view on tariffs. They shared that they were increasing their prices, kind of driven by this expected tariff exposure, which they were already seeing was causing a shift in their buyer behavior, with their customers delaying their online conversions and instead visiting physical stores instead, which I think is really interesting. And those are insights, that we could kind of talk to them about from a Rockerbox perspective, because we were seeing that data in real time in their metrics, which is interesting. So I think that kind of goes back to like what tools or features can Rockerbox help these brands track? Like we're helping them track, like, is there a change in the way that their consumers are purchasing? And if so, how can they compensate for that on their end? And Kelsey, I think your team has done a really great job in being like a little bit consultative in that process and conversations with our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. We have John who is validating that in the luxury goods space, they're seeing panic buying ahead of price increases. So that speaks to that shortened consideration window temporarily when it's like, hey, I think prices are increasing, let's buy now.
100%. And I'll say we just purchased our new hot tub for the same reason. So everybody's pulling the trigger.
All right. With rising price sensitivity, how can brands adjust creative and how can measurement validate those changes? Ashley, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. So I think like when we're talking about messaging and creative to kind of like stay competitive, it's interesting, right? Because price sensitivity is up, value-based messaging becomes really important, and consumers are looking for affordability to some extent. They're looking for quality, and they're looking for justification when it comes to spending. I think a good example of this is what we're seeing from Ford right now. Like Ford vehicles, and they've like increased their Made in America campaigns. And I think we're going to continue to see brands leverage their product origin where it's applicable, right? So if there are brands who are sourcing everything in the US or places that are not impacted by tariffs, we're going to see them start to highlight those as value propositions even more than maybe they have in the last couple of years. We're also seeing several Rockerbox customers kind of adjusting their creative to emphasize durability, domestic sourcing, like I said, and different like promotional opportunities. One of the performance marketing leads on a call I was listening to told us that every single expense is getting scrutinized to the nth degree. And basically, like in context, Rockerbox is being used by them to help them measure their mid-funnel impact and validate the changes via incrementality. So I think there's kind of a lot of moving pieces there. Where brands are leveraging different methodologies from a measurement perspective to really understand what's working for them.
Yeah, I think adding to that from a price sensitivity perspective overall, I think we can expect a few things from consumers. One of that is downgrading. So meaning, consumers who previously would have purchased something at a certain price point, they're seeing those prices rise, or they have the anticipation that those prices might rise, and they may be looking for a cheaper alternative. For brands in the room where you have, this isn't for our luxury home goods retailer, but for other people in the room who you have a good that's lower price alternative to something else in market, this could be a really good opportunity to revisit your conquesting strategy. So do you already have your conquesting campaign set up and optimized against those brands that are a bit of a higher price point than you? You may be able to capture some of that traffic and some of those buyers in that way. The other thing that you can start to think about here is, what are creative things that you can test into around price sensitivity? So something that I've been talking to customers about, and this is something we speak a lot around holiday, is bundling. So are there creative bundling options that you can test out for more price sensitive customers that they can get a discount, while also featuring different parts of your product lineup that this type of customer might not have previously bought? So those are a couple things. And then just also knowing that customers are going to be more discount, I would say, seeking. So this can impact the performance of channels like affiliate. You may see more customers on their path to conversion going to those coupon sites before they convert. And this can have an impact on, if you have more of a content driven affiliate versus coupon driven, this could impact some of your affiliate performance.
Like that leads nicely into our next question, which is what channels are most likely to be affected by shifting consumer behavior, and how can marketers use Rockerbox to evaluate performance beyond last click? Ashley, you want to take this one?
Yeah. So I thought this was interesting. I had some thoughts on this personally, but I wanted to do a little bit of research and see like what do some of like the other industry leaders think is going to happen. And I thought it was really interesting. One of the reports from eMarketer that they just released like a week ago, they're anticipating social advertising is expected to take a direct hit. Basically, they were projecting that the tariffs were going to reduce the U.S. social ad spending by as much as $10 billion in 2025, which is really interesting to me, right? And I think a lot of it, from my personal perspective, I think what we're going to see is that brands are going to double down on what they know works for them. Some some of the other channels that maybe are less proven. At the same time, I think customers across sectors are reporting like channel volatility. Campaigns that used to be reliable are suddenly not reliable. And a lot of that ties into kind of what Kelsey was talking about earlier, which is that when the customer kind of like journey is changing and the path to conversion is changing, some of those channels obviously are going to be like their weights are going to be shifting as well. I think notably one of the brands in apparel that I was listening to, they noted that their channel diversification strategy was essentially like completely disrupted when the tariffs hit the regions that they'd moved production to after exiting China. So they had already like kind of made decisions to exit China, and then the tariffs hit other regions that they had moved their manufacturing to. And so I think like all of these things, it's like the perfect storm, right? Where brands are trying to figure out what this means for them. But I think overall, kind of taking a step back, we're going to see brands limiting their channel diversification for a little bit, for better or worse. I don't necessarily think that's the best strategy, but I think that it's something we'll see. And as they double down on what they know is working, I would say that this is probably like arguably the best time to continue to invest in channels and to stay diversified. And we've seen that in the past, right? I put together, actually, I was looking back at some of the research I had done previously, and in 2020, like mid 2022, I actually put together a article on advertising during a recession, because that was kind of when this conversation started the first time, or I guess not the first time, but we've been having this conversation for a couple of years, right? It just wasn't tariff driven. And during that time, what I had found in my research was that a study that was conducted by McGraw-Hill, it looked at 600 companies in 16 different countries or industries, some of which maintained or increased their advertising spend, and others who cut or reduced their advertising spend during what was called like the Reagan's recession, which is between like 1980 and 1985. And their findings in that research were astounding. They noted that the companies who continued to advertise during that 2-year recession saw a 256% higher sales than those who did not when the economy returned to growth. And then those who did not continue to advertise and invest in their advertisement during that economic downturn saw a 0% market share increase, with an increase in sales of only 18% once the economy recovered. So that's comparing 250% increase on recovery versus 18% increase on recovery. And then like at the same breath, Nielsen, their research said that the solution isn't to slash the budget during a recession, but to optimize your media mix and invest in channels that are performing well. Finding the right balance ensures that essentially spending is going to be properly allocated for reach, efficiency, and frequency, which is exactly what Rockerbox is kind of supporting our customers in doing today.
Yeah, completely agree with that. I think from a channel perspective, I know I already talked about affiliate a little bit. On the paid search front, and kind of to Ashley's point around lack of diversification or brands making decisions to shift spend away from either upper funnel or even more testing that they've been doing, you can expect some of your paid search prices to increase. So those high converting keywords, you're probably going to have more competition against, as some brands are like, hey, we just need to focus on bottom line and we're going to keep our investment in bread and butter. That could lead to an overinvestment in bottom of funnel, and you could end up actually spending more on that investment overall. And where you might actually see some of the competition clear out is those either top of funnel channels or even channels that might be worth testing into at this time. One thing that you'll likely see is because there's a decrease in, kind of think about it as like impulse buying. What are those channels that you see consumers impulse buy off of? And there might be, impact your performance there. So one example of that could be TikTok Shop or more of those awareness-driven social campaigns. So there might just be kind of a re-examination. This goes back to our previous question, right, around creative and also audience targeting. Is it, given the macro environment we're in right now, who is the right audience to target? What's the right creative to do that with, knowing that consumer behavior is changing slightly, or, sometimes more than slightly. The other thing I would say in relation to Rockerbox measurement is it's really important to have your source of truth data, and whether that's Rockerbox data or GA, so you can understand what are those fluctuations over time. So this is a really good time to, you have baseline performance from the last, X number of months. How does efficiency change as the macro environment changes? This means that you might start to see diminishing returns in channels where you weren't seeing them before. But this also could mean that there's pockets of opportunity in channels where there weren't before. And having that really strong baseline that you can measure against, and then start to think about where there are opportunities to test into new channels and what's the best way to do that.
Mm-hmm. As acquisition costs rise, what can marketers do in Rockerbox to better understand and drive repeat purchases? Kelsey, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think this is a great time for all of our retention folks in the room to shine, and where there's probably going to be increased pressure, right? So this is where you can start to think about, for email, for SMS, and just generally for your campaigns that are focused on retention, how can you drive efficiency? So if you've been putting off your project around restructuring your email campaigns and better understanding what are those win back flows that work really well, and where can you better drive customers back to site, now is the time. And I think we're going to see a huge surge in a refocus on retention focused strategies within some of those own channels. This is also a great opportunity to dive into organic if you haven't already. And with Rockerbox, you can track both new versus repeat. You can look at the impact on that on your own channels. You can look at organic and thinking about where are the opportunities where you can move the needle that don't actually cost your brand money.
Yeah,
Ashley,
for
do you have
sure.
any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything I was going to say, just echoes what you say. I mean, whenever the cost per acquisition increases, lifetime value becomes one of the most important things to pay attention to. And I think, to your point, brands are using Rockerbox to distinguish between new and repeat buyer behaviors and really optimize their campaigns accordingly. One of the customers that I was listening to the call, they share that they're paying closer attention to which customers return and how those behaviors differ across economic shifts, which is interesting, right? Taking a step back and kind of looking over a period of time and looking at their customers. Another was using segment level ROAS and retention specific reporting to kind of guide their messaging and email strategies. And I think, like, in an environment where acquisition can be a little bit volatile, to Kelsey's point, retention is the lever that you can still control. And so Rockerbox kind of gives you the capability to pull that lever effectively.
All right. And how do MMM and incrementality testing help brands make smarter decisions in this kind of uncertain environment? Ashley, you want to this one?
Yeah, I can take this one. So MMM and incrementality testing are essential during a macroeconomic disruption. They essentially help marketers, each individually, but also together, help marketers kind of distinguish between the correlation and causation, which is important. Something that's especially important when budgets are tight and stakes are really high. Like, you need to know, is a channel actually performing, or is it just is there incremental performance in a channel, or would it have happened anyways, right? And that's kind of that value proposition of incrementality testing, is the causality. Rockerbox customers are doubling down. They're using scenario modeling tools to kind of stimulate what would happen if they shifted some of their budget. We've had customers run incrementality tests on email, confirming that it's still driving lift despite kind of softer top line performance, things like that. I think that these tools kind of enable smarter risk taking to some extent, and really helping marketers prioritize what to cut, what to protect, and what to ultimately double down on.
Yeah, I think this is also a great opportunity if you've already run incrementality tests on certain channels or tactics. Given the change in buying behavior, the change in the current environment, it actually is a good time to retest into some of those priority channels. You may see different results. That could mean in either direction. Maybe a channel where you previously didn't see a lift is now more efficient and a better investment. Or it could mean an easy decision to, we're going to cut budget from this because we have a really strong data point here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point.
All right. And for brands looking to stay nimble, whether testing new channels or shifting spend, what Rockerbox insights are most important to guide smart decisions? Ashley, you want to take this one?
Sure. I think that specifically in a volatile kind of economic climate, the most agile brands aren't reacting. To Kelsey's point, they're testing in real time. And some of the key metrics that I think are being tracked are conversion, lag by channel or region, incrementality, by customer type. So like new versus returning visitors, what Kelsey was talking about earlier, kind of emerging ROAS trends by audience or by creative, and then kind of just like mid-funnel contribution among kind of your upper funnel tactics that you're running. One of the clients that we talked to kind of shared that tariff uncertainty triggered this shift to month by month planning rather than quarterly. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier with like this general customer sentiment that the economic pressure that has been presented by these tariffs is really like pulling marketers away from being able to look at the big picture or do like long-term planning and really thinking very tactically of like month by month, day by day, like what should we be doing right now in a really reactive manner. And so I think like Kelsey has, I don't know if she said this to the group, but Kelsey has some construction happening in her building. So don't be alarmed. No one is breaking into her apartment at this moment. It was just some construction. But I think that like in Rockerbox, basically marketers can identify these shifts really quickly and they can adjust accordingly. And so whether it's reducing reliance on promos or maybe rediscovering an underutilized channel or retesting a channel that maybe historically was underperforming that might be performing now with the different economic change and the kind of the shift in consumer behavior. I think like the overarching sentiment that we're seeing from our most successful brands is data-led, not panic-led. These brands are looking for information and data versus kind of the sky is falling and everything is on fire. They're looking for what channels are actually moving the needle, and then they're doubling down into those channels.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. I think the big thing is understanding your baseline metrics. So pre-tariff changes, where were you at from CPA or ROAS perspective, depending on what you optimize against your channels and tactics. Understand what that baseline is. Also understand what is your typical time to convert. So as that changes, you understand what your pre-tariff baseline was. The other thing I'll say, which isn't necessarily related to measurement, but this is a really good opportunity to just be authentic with your consumer and test new forms of messaging and see how that resonates. I actually saw a post from a luggage company where they just sent a really honest email to their entire email base talking about like, hey, like no one knows what's going on and neither do we. We may have to increase pricing, we may not, but if you want to buy your luggage, now is the time before we might have to change pricing. And I think it's a great opportunity to just lower some of the barriers and have an honest conversation with your buyer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I've seen a couple of brands do that. And I think it's a really, I think it helps kind of bridge the gap between the consumer fear right now that we're seeing and like where you all are from a brand perspective. It's not just brands who are wondering like what the impact is going to be. Consumers are kind of facing that too. So I think the brands that are really transparent in that are actually like increasing their impact from a sales perspective. If any of you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. It was a quiet group today, and Kelsey and I expected it to be a loud one. So let us know if you have any questions. We'll give it a couple of minutes before we hop off. We will send this recording out afterwards, so you'll get this if you want to reference any of it. And we can go ahead and send out, Ariel, we can send out some of the research reports that I mentioned as well, just in case anybody is interested in looking at those a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm. It looks like we got a question in the chat. What channel do you see clients shifting to the most?
Yeah, I would say, and this is not different than to what Ashley said earlier around other times of uncertainty. So that was when we saw interest rate changes. That's during COVID. We see clients shift back to their bread and butter, and those are kind of the workhorse channels. So that can be PMAX, non-brand search, those tactics that are working really well within Meta. I would say, it's great to focus on what works really well, but also don't abandon what's filling your funnel.
That's a good point. I also am really interested. That eMarketer report kind of threw me off with them anticipating such a drop to search. To social. I'm going to be really interested to kind of watch how all of this unfolds. Like Kelsey said at the beginning, we're not mind readers. We don't know what is going to happen, just like everyone else. But I would be interested to see that, because we do see social as a really effective channel for a lot of brands. And so I'm wondering if a lot of that is, if that assumption or like prediction is tied to shifts in consumer behavior, and people just thinking that consumers are going to be less likely to purchase via social than they have been in the more recent history. But that'll be interesting to me, I think. But to Kelsey's point, I think that the customers who end up being most successful through all of this will be the customers who don't abandon ship when it comes to their advertising strategy and kind of the channels that they're diversifying into. I see we have another question here from Dave. Have you seen different trends based on products that are high price point versus cheaper products? You mentioned earlier consumers are panic buying, but is that true across the board? That's a good question. Kelsey, do you have thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say so far, I don't think we have enough data on what consumers are going to do to have a solid answer there. I think probably what we expect is that the higher the price point, the higher the price sensitivity, and the bigger impact to consideration period. But we could see that to be different. So I think time will tell as some of this shakes out and brands actually start to make changes to pricing strategy.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out. I think there's probably a little bit more, I would say some of the cheaper products or like the lower cost items, there's probably a higher likelihood that those are manufactured in areas that are going to see more of an impact from these tariffs. Whereas not that luxury goods aren't, but there's different options. I think we've seen with just the couple, I agree with Kelsey, we don't have enough data to be like conclusive here, but we've seen a couple of our brands who operate more in that luxury space who have already they've already kind of changed where they're manufacturing and moved out of China and moved into different regions. Now those regions might have been hit also, but to a different level. So I think there's just like a lot of different factors here that'll determine how that question is answered.
It looks like we got another question too. Anything related to subscription services?
Yeah, I would say kind of to the point earlier, nothing that's been fleshed out yet, but it's going to be more important than ever to focus on customer retention, knowing that buying cycles are going to be longer and it's going to be harder to acquire new customers. That's where the point we talked around investment in email and SMS is really going to pay off in keeping those repeat purchasers and keeping them in your subscription service. To Lisa's question, we're actually definitely not suggesting the overinvestment in search, more so talking about trends we expect to see versus what we would recommend doing. And I think this is just what we've seen in the past.
Awesome. It looks like that is it from a question perspective. If you all have additional questions that come up or something that you think about after the fact, you can always reach out to us and we're happy to answer those as they come in. And if you had questions during this session and you are connected to somebody on the Rockerbox team, we'll go ahead and let them know that you had some questions and make sure your CSM, if relevant, or the account director that you're working with can reach out to you and help talk you through some of these things as well. But Awesome. You're welcome, Chris, Elizabeth, John, Lisa, you're all welcome. And thank you all for joining. We appreciate you being here. This is obviously a continuing conversation that we'll continue to monitor from a Rockerbox perspective, and continue to shed insight on how we're helping brands navigate this as it becomes relevant. So we appreciate you joining today and look forward to chatting in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.